thank you so much for tuning in. I'm Imogen. We're going to be doing a walkthrough video tutorial today for this cute knitted crop top. I've had a few people on my Instagram asking for a walkthrough, so I'm going to be going along step by step. It's actually really easy to make as long as you're okay working in knit stitches and purl stitches. I'm going to be explaining how to do the leaning decrease to create the shaping. The yarn that I've used is Wool in the Gang Crazy Sexy Wool. This colour is eucalyptus green and in the video it is forest green. They have a lot of other colours as well, so if you wanted to use exactly the same yarn then that's the one that I got. You can use a different type of yarn, but you'll need to make sure it works on 12mm knitting needles. We're going to be spending some time together working on this, so go and get yourself a cup of tea, get yourself some snacks, and let's get going.
This is the leaning decrease method that we're going to be using in this tutorial. You can see the left hand side and the right hand side, they both look exactly the same, and the decrease stitches are nice and symmetrical. There are a lot of different ways that you can do decreases in knitting, but this is the only method that I've found that works perfectly for me. You can see here on the black top, I actually made this quite a while ago, and the decreases are not the same on the left and the right. You have these extra little lumps, and it just doesn't look as sharp, so I'm going to be showing you how to avoid having this happen. I am going to be walking you through how to adjust the sizing. This light green top is actually 2 stitches larger, and you can see over here the difference. And here's a photograph of me wearing it. I would say this turned out a little big on me and it was maybe a size 12. I'm going to go into this in more detail. Okay, starting off, I have got 400 grams of yarn. That's because this particular yarn comes in balls of 200 grams, so I've got 2 of those. I didn't use all of it, however. I have got knitting needles size 12 and a pair in size 10. I've also got a crochet hook. If you don't have one of these, you can probably manage without it, but it is handy if you've got one to hand. And then I've got some snips and a darning needle. You're going to want to start off by creating a slip knot and casting on your stitches. For this video I am going to cast on 30 stitches, and that turned out to be quite a nice size small, I would say size 8 to 10. The first time that I made this top, the light green that you just saw, that was 32 stitches, so it's only 2 stitches difference, and I would say that's a size 10 to 12. So feel free to make adjustments as you see fit and just add, I would say, give or take 2 stitches to increase or decrease the size as you need to. Once you've casted on all of your stitches, you will want to swap to the size 12 needles. I've got this really rubbishy plastic grey one, so you can't really get much worse than that, but it will do the job. We are then going to start working in 1 by 1 rib stitch, so insert your needle and do 1 stitch knitwise. Then you're going to swap the yarn over to the front and knit the next stitch purlwise. Then continue swapping the yarn front to back in 1 by 1 rib until you have reached the end of the row. Once you get to this point, remember to swap out the size 10 needle. You now need to be working on the 12mm needle. I've made that mistake myself. We're going to carry on working in our 1x1 rib. Now as I knitted this stitch on the last row, we now need to purl it, and you can tell that because it's got the little lump facing you. So if it's got a lump, it needs to be purled, and if it doesn't have a lump, it needs to be knitted. So carry on until you get to the end of this second row of rib stitch. Once you're nearing the end of this second row, we are going to repeat this step again for 2 more rows. So you will have done in total 4 rows of rib stitch after we cast it on. So here's the end of my second row, and then moving forwards, this is what it will look like when you have done a further 2 rows, so 4 rows in total of rib. You can of course count the little stitches to make sure you've got 4 if you lose count, because I know I always do. It should look exactly the same on the front and on the back. The only way you can really tell which side is the front is by the little row that we've casted on at the bottom. We are then going to go ahead and work in stocking stitch. So you will basically just need to do the next row. All of the stitches should be knit stitches. So go ahead and knit every stitch until you get to the end. Okay, so once you've knitted your last knit stitch, you'll turn the work over, and this row, all of the stitches need to be done in purl. So you're going to insert the needle from the back and just do all of the stitches purlwise. Once you reach the end of the row, you might be able to see that there is now a difference between the bottom section, which we've done in rib, and you should now have 2 rows done in stocking stitch. From here, you need to have a total of 15 rows. So we've already done 2. We need to go ahead and do another 13 more rows of stocking stitch, which should make your work look like this. If you lose count, you can check how many rows you've done by finding the first row of stocking stitch above one of the bars of the rib. Then count upwards all of the stitches that you've done until you reach the needle. I can see here that I've done 14 rows, so I need to do 1 more. This will turn out with a cropped finish. If you would prefer to create something that's going to be a little bit longer, feel free to add a few more rows in stocking stitch as you need to, so you could even go up to 20 rows if you wanted to. Similarly, if you wanted it to be even shorter, perhaps if you're petite, you could do 12 rows instead of 15, and feel free to just adjust this length until you feel like it's the right size for you. Okay, we are now ready to start decreasing. This is going to be the point where the top comes in at the underarm point. So from here we are going to go ahead and cast off 2 stitches. This is a purl row, so you're going to go ahead and purl the first stitch as normal. Then go ahead and purl the second stitch. And then you need to slip the first stitch over the top and off the end of the needle. You're going to do the same thing again one more time. So knit a stitch and slip the first one all the way off the end. So you've now casted off 2 stitches total. So you're going to carry on and purl all of the stitches as normal until you get right to the end of the row. We now need to do exactly the same thing on the other side, but this is a knit row. So you're going to knit the first stitch and then knit the second one exactly the same way. We need to cast off 2 stitches. So that's the first stitch, cast it off, knit 1, and then cast off the second stitch for this side. Then continue knitting all of the stitches until you get to the end. Once that's done, you should have a little step on each side of those 2 stitches that we've just casted off, and that will form the underarm point. From here we need to start working our decrease stitches. Now this is all going to happen on the purl rows. So you're going to start off by purling 1 stitch as normal. This is going to be the same for every decrease. You will have 1 stitch at the edge to form a border. So you're going to do this every single time. Purl 1, and then the next 2 you need to purl 2 stitches into 1. So you can do this by slipping your needle underneath both stitches and purling them together. Carry on and purl all of the stitches as normal until you get down to the last 3 stitches. Once you get down to your last 3 stitches, we're not going to do the same method that we did on the other side, and this is quite important. Instead, you're going to slip the first stitch over, knitwise, onto the needle without knitting it. And then the same again for the next stitch. And then you're going to put them both back again. Basically what you're doing is turning the stitches over so that it now faces the other way. But instead of purling this way through the front loops, you need to come around and access through the back of the loops. This might feel a little bit awkward to do, but you should soon get the hang of it. Then do the last border stitch, and that is effectively the left leaning decrease. You'll see it abbreviated sometimes as SSP, which stands for slip, slip, purl. The next row is going to be knit every stitch as normal. You don't need to do any decreases, just knit every single stitch until you get to the end. So we're going to do another purl row and another decrease stitch. So exactly the same way that you did before. Purl the border stitch as normal, then purl 2 stitches together the easy way. Once you reach your last 3 remaining stitches, we're going to do slip, slip, purl again. So slip your first stitch and your second stitch, then move them back onto the left hand needle and purl coming through from the back of the loops to purl the 2 stitches together and purl your edge stitch. Yeah, that's my fluffy purple dressing gown sleeve, please ignore that. Clearly we knit in comfort over here, not style. You can see over here the decrease is leaning inwards and it's swallowing all of the decreased stitches. You're going to need to carry on in this method for a total of 14 more rows. We've already done 2, so it should be 12 more rows. You need to knit all of the knit rows as normal, and on the purl rows, decrease as we've just been doing. In other words, until you've got 12 stitches left on your needle. I've got 14, so I need to do one more decrease row. If you started out with more than 30 stitches to begin with, then this number is going to be different. So for example, if you started out with 32 stitches, you will need to decrease until you get to 14. If you had 34 to begin with, then you're going to end on 16, and just size up accordingly, because obviously a larger width is going to be bigger at both the top and the bottom, so that's just going to keep it in proportion. Okay, I've now finished. I've got 12 stitches on my needle, and this is finished for the front part of the top. So I need to leave it on the needle for now. If you don't have a spare one and you need to use this to create the back, then what you could do is slip it off and just put it on a holding needle. So maybe you could grab the smaller size 10 one that we used earlier, just to make sure that your stitches aren't going to start unraveling and it's going to be safe. So put this to one side. You're going to need to do exactly the same thing to create the back of the top, but you will need to make it 2 stitches larger. So I started with 30, so for the back I'm going to do 32 stitches. If you started with 32 on the front, you'll do 34 on the back, so just add 2 stitches to make the back slightly bigger. So I've gone ahead and completed the back. You can see it is a tiny bit larger than the front because of those extra 2 stitches, and I've kept that on the needle as well. So there are 14 stitches on the top of my needle for the back and 12 stitches on the top of the needle for the front, and neither of them should be casted off just yet because we are going to join them together. Okay, we're going to start with the front panel. Don't worry if this is still on the smaller needle that you put it on for holding, that's absolutely fine. We're going to go ahead and cast these stitches off. So knit the first stitch, knit the second, take the first one over the top and slide them off the end, and then continue all the way until you have casted off all of your stitches. Once you get down to the end, you've casted off your last stitch and you've got one left on your needle. You would normally go ahead and cut the thread. Instead, we're going to take the crochet hook. Mine's a 12mm hook. If you don't have one, you could probably manage to do this just with your fingers. What you're going to do is take the needle out and pop your hook through the loop, and then we're basically just going to chain stitches. Anyone that's familiar with crochet will know how to do this. Just grab the yarn and pull it straight through. That counts as one. So we're going to go ahead and chain a chain of 10. Once you've chained 10 stitches, make sure that it's going nice and flat in a continuous line along the top so that you don't have any twists and that the chain isn't going to end up wrapping around and facing the wrong way. Here I found it easier just to flip this front over so that it's facing down. Then you want to take out the crochet hook and pop in the needle. You're going to need to grab the back section, which should still be safely on the needle. And once you've got your chain on the spare knitting needle, you'll need to insert this through the last stitch and continue as if you're going to cast them all off. So knit the first one and then cast off the loop that's got the strap attached to it, and this should keep everything in a nice continuous loop without any joins. Once you've casted off all of your stitches and you are down to the last one left on the needle, go and grab your crochet hook again and slip this through. Then we're going to chain another 10 stitches. Try and keep them the same size as the ones that you made on the other side to make sure that your straps are both the same length. So go ahead and chain 10, again making sure to keep it laying nice and straight so that when you join it to the front you don't have any twists. Okay, so go and grab the front corner and you want to poke your hook through the very first edge stitch that you casted off. Grab a chain and pull it through both stitches, and then you'll be able to just pull that tail through. We're now going to go and hide our ends, so snip off your yarn if you haven't done so already and grab a darning needle. You can do this with a crochet hook if you don't have a darning needle. I know they're so elusive and I always lose mine, but it is much easier with a needle. The best way to try and thread this is wrap it around the outside and pull upwards with the needle, trying to squash the end down flat, and then insert it where the yarn is folded over, because it's much easier than trying to get the big fat fluffy end through the eye of the needle and you're going to end up splitting the yarn. Then I went and stitched through a couple of times just to secure that end and make sure that it isn't going anywhere and keep it nice and tight. The best way to weave in your ends in knitting is to follow the diagonal rows that you can see on the back of the stitches. So wiggle your needle down and poke through, following along the diagonal to just try and hide the ends in the back of some of those stitches. You don't want to be poking too far forwards because it's going to distort the front of the work. So just go down as long as you can, pull it through. Obviously you don't want to break the yarn because this yarn is quite fragile, so pull it firmly but try and be gentle as well. And then you can go back again. Make sure that you spread it all out so that your stitches are nice and relaxed, and then snip off the end, and that's well and truly hidden, and that's not going to go anywhere. Here I found that one of my edge stitches was just a little bit loose and it was making a gap. If you have a similar problem, then you can follow the yarn along and just try and wiggle it through. You might find that it's actually a little bit tight along the way, so if you just keep pulling, you should be able to get rid of the excess. I'm not sure if there's a more technical way to do this, but I found that this works for me. Let me know in the comments below if you know why this might be happening. I always try and make sure that my edge stitches are as tight as I can get them, and I still always end up with excess. I'm now going to go and join the side seams using mattress stitch. So cut yourself a piece of yarn, make sure that it's long enough. I managed to find myself another darning needle slightly longer, which should be a bit easier for this step. You're going to start at the top of the armhole, and you're going to look for not the very edge stitch, but the one next to it. And you're looking for where the two stitches point together to form a V. You want to go behind and grab that stitch. Then you're going to do the same on the other side. Grab the top of the V where the stitches are pointing towards one another and come through. Leave yourself enough of a tail because we're going to come back to this and secure it at the end. So just pull it through for now. Then go down and go through the next little stitch and join it up on the other side. You'll find that this method should be pretty invisible. Don't pull the yarn too tightly because you will distort the stitches. So you want to just pull it through gently, and you should be bringing both sides together and they will sit perfectly. Continue working your way down. Make sure that you're going in a straight line and you're grabbing the stitch directly below the one that you've just done. You don't want to be waving in between each row of stitches. Keep it nice and straight and it'll give you a nice invisible join. When you reach the start of the rib section, because we've done an even number of stitches, here I've got a knit row at the very edge on the front and the back section. So instead of leaving the edge stitch, I'm going to slip out a little bit and just join the edge stitch to the very edge stitch. I hope that makes sense. It doesn't matter too much, just do what you think looks the neatest way. And I find that here, just joining it at the very end works quite nicely. I'll show you in a second what this looks like on the inside. When you get down to the very bottom, I've got a little tail here, so I'm going to go and tie these two together just to make sure that it's nice and secure. You don't want that to be coming undone. Go through and bring your tails to the inside of the top, and then you're going to weave them in exactly the same way that we did to begin with. It doesn't really matter too much how you disguise that yarn. Here I'm just poking through to just try and hide it in the back of some of those rib stitches, and then follow along the diagonal of the back of the stitches. I'm now going to go back to the top where we left the end unsecured. You might like to do this as you start at the beginning, but I find it a little bit easier to just come back to it at the end. So you want to rethread that end back onto your needle and secure the top by going through the stitches the same way that you've done the seam, and just go around a couple of times just to make sure that the end is nice and secure. Come through to the inside and then go ahead and hide your end exactly the same way. This is what the seam is going to look like once you're done. You can give the little stitches a little tug if you feel like they're being pulled too much to the left or the right, which can happen when you're joining the mattress stitch, so just give the stitches a little tweak. This is how it looks on the inside. So you've got the very edge stitch as a seam allowance, and then at the bottom where there's the rib section there isn't any seam allowance. Once you've done both seams, you need to steam everything. Sorry about this terrible lighting, this is the best that I could get right here, so just bear with me. You're going to need to use the steam function on your iron, which is this button, unless you've got a proper steamer, which I don't. This is the most basic box standard iron. You're not attempting to flatten the knit here, so you need to hold the weight of the iron in your hand, try not to press down onto the work. Instead, you just need to keep going at the steam button and just blast as much steam through it as you can. Basically, when you're knitting, wrapping the yarn around the needles creates a wrap and a twist in the yarn, and it can cause it to lay a little bit lumpy. So when you steam it, you're getting everything nice and relaxed, you're getting it to settle into its new way of being knitted, and it will just go so much more floppy and it will look 100 times better. It's my absolute favourite part of making any knitted project. If any of your edges are rolling inwards, you can see mine is here around the top. You can use the steam to get it to roll flat. You can do that around the top and around the armholes as well. And we are now all done. I've gone ahead and added my little IA knitwear label at the top. Everything is all steamed and looking beautiful. Thank you so much if you've been watching this far. I really hope it's been helpful for you. I would love to see what you've all made, so please tag me IA Knitwear on Instagram and send me a message if you get stuck with anything, and to let me know if you've enjoyed the video.